My name is Arlene Murray. Currently I'm completing postgraduate study in communication at Deakin University. Today I'm here in Fitzroy, Melbourne, a suburb that was founded on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. Over the last few weeks, I've been speaking to a range of Aboriginal people here in Melbourne to understand their views on reconciliation and how we can best move forward. In this video then, I'd like to look at how digital media is able to support or at times hinder Aboriginal activists to achieve social change. The Aboriginal community in Australia has suffered a long history of injustice, from the frontier wars associated with British colonisation, introduction of disease and loss of land at this time, to the protection policies that segregated Aboriginals and legalised the removal of their children, and the assimilation policies that allowed inequality in wages, employment conditions and social welfare benefits. The lack of a treaty with Australia's First People and the development of a constitution that did not even acknowledge their presence laid the foundation for generations of suffering and inequality. Today, these issues are still far from resolved, and the gap between well-being of Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians remains. I'm interested in how the Aboriginal movement uses social media to connect, to educate and to be heard. One article that I read by Dreher, McCallum and Waller highlights the role of digital media in policy debates about Indigenous issues. The authors looked at the possibilities to be heard that the online world offers to Aboriginal activists, and yet the limitations of being heard in a meaningful manner within the media and political context in Australia. The article considers two recent Indigenous social media campaigns in response to government policy, the Recognise campaign and the So Black Australia campaign. I'd like to consider the Recognise campaign here. They analysed the social media campaigns by considering three key aspects that come out of the study of participatory media. The first aspect they looked at was participation. Carpentier suggests a continuum of the intensity of participation. In this model, minimalist participation includes producing media and dispersing it, whilst maximalist participation refers to influence in decision-making. The ability to produce media, therefore, does not necessarily equal the ability to influence decision-making. The authors argue, when thinking about constitutional reform, we need to keep the maximalist version of participation firmly in view. The second concept is mediatization theory. It's about the relationship between changes in media and communications on one hand and changes in culture and society on the other. It's a growing field of study. The issues here include the mediatization of politics, which then impacts on policy making. What does this mean? Well, there are concerns that political practices are becoming more aligned with the dominant commercial and mainstream media institutions, and that as this happens, they are less able to engage with grassroots or alternative media. An associated concern is the workplace constraints on journalists, which limit their actual ability to share a diverse range of Indigenous stories and include Indigenous sources in their reporting. The report found an increasingly intimate relationship between a small range of key journalists in powerful news media outlets and political and bureaucratic policymakers. The third concept used by the authors was political listening. This is about not just speaking up, but about the challenge of being heard on one's own terms in centres of influence, as Dreher puts it. This focus on listening shifts some of the focus and responsibility for change away from the marginalised and back onto the institutions and practices that control who and what is heard in a mediatised environment. Reconciliation Australia was funded by the government to deliver an awareness program on constitutional reform. The recognised strategy included social media, marketing and other activities to encourage community support for constitutional reform. It was supported by high-profile Indigenous people and included a steering committee of non-governmental and Indigenous involvement. Some in the Indigenous community question Recognise's ability to represent a diverse range of Indigenous voices. Within the Aboriginal community, there are some concerns that the government's specific focus on constitutional reform sidelines other important issues that need to be addressed, such as land rights and self-determination. The article highlighted concerns that the relationship between the media and a few high-profile Aboriginal representatives might drown out other voices, a mediatization effect. There are some positive signs. New Matilda is an online progressive news outlet. When it published blog posts about concerns with Recognise, they were picked up by The Guardian, The Age and the ABC. Dreher, McCallum and Waller point out that there is a crucial role for mainstream news media in amplifying Indigenous voices to non-Indigenous voices and policy makers. Aboriginal people have been using writing to tell their own stories for many years. Fordham in 2018 points out that during the 1980s in particular, Aboriginal Australians' land rights negotiations with the government were stalling. During this era, she says, the writing of Aboriginal memoirs allowed individuals to recount their own experiences, challenging the official version of history and correct white colonial views of history and the variety within the Indigenous community. Social media activism builds on this tradition, and its ease of use means that many and varied Aboriginal voices are now able to be heard. Petre in 2013 points out that this online writing allows for static and stereotypical notions of indigeneity to be challenged. When Aboriginal people describe themselves online, their indigeneity is just one component of their identity. Collectively, this strengthens the understanding that the community is varied. The people I spoke with identified the need for formal recognition and treaties, as well as grassroots reform. The impact of mediatisation in our community places an onus on the mainstream media to amplify these voices and for all of us to listen.